Hello, my name is Elliot Alexander, and this is my presentation to potentially Congress members of the U.S. on how emotion affects our political psychology, a top-down solution to political polarization on social media. And first, I wanted to just go over the idea of political polarization. And as it says here, at its essence, political polarization is an act of progressively inching a particular political affiliation to more and more extreme views, hence creating a greater and greater political divide between two or more democratic parties. And particularly on the topic of social media, there's an idea of what's called echo chambers. And it's basically when individual members of a society, particularly a democratic society, surround themselves on social media with viewpoints that particularly pertain to their own viewpoints, and they do not end up looking at information or exposing themselves to information that is of an opposite viewpoint. And there's a nice little graphic here to describe that with everybody in their own little bubbles with their phones, stuff like that. Um, but a couple of the studies that I'd actually like to note, one of these was back in my first project. And this first study that was in my source review was a study called A Model of Opinion and Propagation Structure Polarization in Social Media. And this, just to highlight a few points, is they are trying to um, attribute group polarization on social media to news propagation. So whatever the news comes out with, either on social media or on your TV, bases how people view political ideas. And this is based on various sociological and psychological studies. Um, and this one is super important because I'm going to try and use this study as a basis for my argument as well. But the solution is going to be more connected to both of these studies. The second study is called Tears and Fears: How Do Emotions Change Our Political Attitudes? And as you can say, it's kind of a similar topic to what I'm arguing for right now. But this study basically explains that emotions like anxiety and sadness drive changes in our political views, even if those emotional cues are unrelated to politics. And you see this every day in political debates on how they try to use um, emotion to drive people's attitudes towards their own motives. And the way politicians also act towards each other and the emotions that they display towards each other, and how that interaction is also displayed on various news platforms, affects how we as citizens treat others with opposing viewpoints. And that's kind of where my argument stems from. Um, is the idea that the way that our political leaders act towards each other creates a waterfall effect almost on how we view and how we act to each other on our political views, especially on social media, because that is one of the biggest forms of news that at least our young generation uses, and quite a bit of our older generation now. Um, I have a quick YouTube video here on describing some of the political feuds that have gone on recently and the language that they use between each other. And this is, I won't play the whole video, but here's an example of some of the negative connotation that politicians use to each other, and how we also see those views because of them.
So completely inappropriate in so many ways.
She's not the same person. She's lost it.
But again, a dose of his own medicine.
Stone cold crazy.
He comes in with doggy do on his shoes, and everybody who works with him has that on their shoes too.
Crazy Nancy Pelosi's House Democrats have branded themselves with an eternal mark of shame, and it really is. It's a disgrace.
He's our president, and I would rather he not be taking something that has not been approved by the scientists, especially in his age group and in his, shall we say, weight group, what is morbidly obese, they say.
Oh, I don't respond to her. I think she's a waste of time. Pelosi is a sick woman. She's got a lot of problems, a lot of mental problems.
What the president did was totally outrageous.
Anyway, so as you can see there, some of those politicians use very, very negative language when describing the opposition, and a lot of times the debates and the statements that these politicians make are riddled with fallacious viewpoints, fallacious arguments that are just simply not true, and it's because they use this emotion-driven connotation of words to try and put the others on blast, and it simply puts a negative view in all of the citizens' minds as well for that person, regardless of what that politician actually believes in. Um, Now, the relation to psychology for my argument for this particular topic is I'm going to go ahead and start off with describing the reinforcement pathway very, very simply. And it includes the prefrontal cortex and the ventral tegmental areas, which in essence is your decision making process, your emotional complex, and your memory complex as well, and how all of those correlate together. And if so, for this example here, if a typical person relates Trump to the negative emotions displayed by powerful opposing political leaders, in my video's case, that would be Pelosi, then the brain actually reinforces that belief on a molecular level at the synapses in your brain. And obviously, this occurs inversely as well. So, for Republicans that see Nancy Pelosi's face, and they're going to automatically, their brain is automatically going to reinforce the visual of seeing that person with a negative connotation in their brain. And so, as that process keeps going, and if you don't hinder that process, then soon enough, your emotion will overdrive every other effect on your decision making, simply by just seeing or hearing that person's voice. But in psychological terms, the brain will create a conditioned negative response, and that's again that it's a trained reinforcement response any single time that they see this person or someone with an opposite belief. So my solution then is to basically make politicians, our leaders in Congress, aware of their own individual susceptibility to emotion and how it affects their decision making, and and that's stated right here. But firstly, I'll just go ahead and go over that there are actually some psychological tests that analyze emotion and its effect on cognition, but however, these tests are within the scope of mental disorders. And we're not necessarily talking about mental disorders, we're just talking about normal individuals and how emotions change that decision making process. And the reinforcement process, especially. But if there could be a test that could be, procured to kind of measure how each individual's cognition when emotion is involved, then that would be great, simply so that way we can make each individual aware of how they react to opposition. And with that self-awareness comes a noticeable change in language and companionship, even if people don't or if even if people do disagree with each other. Then if they're just mindful of the language that they use and how they work with other people, then there's going to be a drastic change in how the news perceives political companionship and political, even just like efficiency. And it will also, in turn, drastically change us as citizens' perception of the political leaders in our country, because we will automatically stop relating some of these opposition leaders with negative connotations, and that will be shown in the news, and it creates almost a waterfall effect again for if you stop acting like children in the White House or in the Capitol building, then people are going to see that, and it may in turn trickle down and create more cohesiveness between our citizens and between our news programs. And so, because young people are so heavily involved on social media, if we see more companionship on social media, then we would also in turn display that companionship between others. and there would be a less politically polarized view from every individual on social media as well. Thank you very much for listening. That is my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.